When Boston police officer John O'Keefe went to an after-party on a freezing January night, he was surrounded by people who should have known exactly what to do in an emergency. Other officers, friends, people connected to law enforcement. But by morning, John wasn't inside that house. He was outside, lying in the snow. And almost immediately, suspicion turned to his girlfriend, Karen Reed, the one who dropped him off there hours earlier. Police said that she had hit him with her SUV and then left him to die. But Karen's side of the story was much different. And as the case unfolded, the question became less about what happened in that driveway, and more about what may have happened inside that house. The man at the center of this case was Boston police officer John J. O'Keefe III. To his family and friends, he was JJ, or Johnny, a guy from Braintree, Massachusetts, who had built his entire adult life around law enforcement, family, and responsibility. John graduated from Braintree High School and went on to earn a master's degree in criminal justice from the University of Massachusetts. And by January of 2022, he'd spent nearly 16 years with the Boston Police Department. But the part of John's life that says the most about him has nothing to do with the badge. Years before this case, tragedy struck his family when both his sister and brother-in-law passed away unexpectedly. And when that happened, John stepped up in a way most people only talk about. He adopted his niece and nephew. From that point forward, he wasn't just their uncle, he became the person raising them, protecting them, and trying to give them some kind of stability after they'd already lost so much. By all accounts, John was the kind of man that people trusted. He was friendly, dependable, and loyal. He wasn't someone constantly chasing attention or causing drama. He seemed to live a fairly quiet life in Canton, Massachusetts, working and spending time with his family and hoping to take care of the kids that he'd chosen to raise as his own. And then there was Karen Reed. Karen had been raised in Massachusetts and Virginia, and like her father, she built her career in finance. She worked as a financial analyst at Fidelity Investments and lived in Mansfield, Massachusetts. Now, Karen and John actually had a history long before this case. They first met back in 2004 and they dated for a while, but eventually that relationship ended and they lost touch. Then, in the middle of 2020, they reconnected on Facebook. At first, it probably felt like one of those strange second chances that only comes once in a lifetime. Two people from each other's past finding their way back together years later. But less than 2 years after they got back together, that second chance would lead both of them to 34 Fairview Road. And by the next morning, John would be dead, and Karen would become the woman accused of killing him. But cases like this, they're rarely what they seem. On the surface, this case seemed like an open and shut story of the girlfriend did it. But that would be so incredibly far from the truth. So it was January 28th, 2022, and Karen and John went out to a bar in Canton called CF McCarthy's. This was sometime around 9 p.m., and a couple of hours later, the couple took their night out next door to the Waterfall Bar and Grill, and it was there that the two met up with some acquaintances and friends of John's. Now, the weather in Massachusetts on this night, it was brutal. There was heavy snowfall, there was a blizzard right around the corner, and to top all this off, there was a storm brewing between Karen and John as well, as they'd gotten into a fight before the meetup at the bar with his friends. It was something about his niece and nephew and Karen spoiling her. And following this argument, Karen stormed off and went home and worked from home for the rest of the day. She talked to her dad on the phone too, and she told him about the whole fight with John. Internally, she was at war with herself. I mean, sure, she was angry, but she also wanted to spend time with her boyfriend and his kids. But now she was cooped up at home when she'd rather be with her boyfriend in Canton. Now, her dad wasn't too thrilled about her making that journey from Mansfield back to Canton in the snow, and he advised her to stay home, but she didn't. And at some point in the evening, John and Karen made up, and the two made plans to meet up at the bar, and that's exactly what happened. At the time of the bar closing, one of the men at the bar, Brian Albert, who was also a friend of John's as well as a fellow BPD officer, invited the couple to his home at 34 Fairview Road, where his son Brian Jr. was celebrating his 23rd birthday. Everyone agreed, and Karen and John get into her Lexus LX 570 a little after 12 a.m., and they made the drive over. The others reached the house first, and the Lexus pulled in about 8 minutes later, so sometime around 12:24 a.m., according to cell phone data. But one thing to know about this group and Karen, from what I could gather, is that she wasn't really familiar with these people. They were mostly people that John knew, and she was just tagging along as his date, and she was mostly just there to spend time with John. So to break the ice, John proceeded to go inside the house first to let everyone know that they'd arrived, while Karen waited out in the car because she felt uncomfortable. John was supposed to come back out and get her, and then they would enter the home together. But Karen waited and waited, and seconds turned into minutes. And after about 4 to 5 minutes, she grew restless. John still hadn't come back for her or signaled for her to join them. And this is getting really weird. I mean, the front door was just feet away. Karen kept waiting in the car as she said she would, but John just never came back. Well, phone activity showed that he walked 36 steps specifically, and this was around 12:32 a.m. And after that, there was no activity on his phone until after 6 a.m. the next morning. So here Karen was, just waiting out in the cold car for a man who never showed up. So understandably, she got fed up with waiting. She assumed that John had either forgotten about her or was making some kind of weird power move, and she just left and went back to his home. She was already not really feeling up to going out in the first place, and now, everywhere she looked, the snowstorm was just getting worse and worse. So she left John there, she went home, and this was all confirmed via phone records. But after arriving home, she continued trying to call him, but he never answered. She left multiple angry voicemails, but really, what else could she do? By now, oddly enough, she'd convinced herself that John was cheating on her with another woman at Brian's house. And I know this may sound like it's totally out of left field, but she'd had suspicions leading up to this that John may have been unfaithful to her. But you've got to admit, cheating on your wife while she's just feet away from the front door waiting for you in the car, that would be a bold move, but regardless, this is where her mind went. Well, hours passed, and it was now around 4:38 a.m., and Karen, who eventually fell asleep, woke up and called John again, but just like a couple hours ago, he wasn't picking up his phone. That was when she really started to panic and decided to call Jennifer McCabe, one of their friends, and she asked about him. See, Jennifer had also been at the house that night, but according to her, she never saw John there, which was super weird because Karen literally watched him walk in the front door, and a bunch of other witnesses from the party at Brian's claimed that they saw Karen alone in the car at the time John was supposedly inside. Well, after hearing this, Karen had enough. She decided she was going back to Brian's house to figure out once and for all what was going on. So she grabbed her keys, got in her car, and raced over to the home. But as she was backing out of the driveway, she smashed her taillight on one of John's cars. And this was all caught on a Ring doorbell camera. Well, an hour later at 6 a.m., Karen, Jennifer, and another friend of John's, Carrie Roberts, arrived at Brian's house. But no sooner than they got there, they noticed something in the front lawn. It was a sizable lump near a flagpole. The lump was covered in snow, but as they brushed it away to see what lay beneath, they found John, lying out in the cold. Emergency services were called immediately, and according to some paramedics as well as Jennifer, Karen was heard saying, "I hit him," suggesting she'd accidentally run John over with her car. But here's the thing, this seemingly pivotal information was never put on any official police report. It was just hearsay, and he said, she said. And according to Karen, she stressed that she didn't say "I hit him." She said something to the effect of, "Could I have hit him?" or "Did I hit him?" But here's the thing, as Karen was leaving Brian's home that evening, her car did record a trigger event. And this is basically when your car detects that something dangerous has happened, such as a collision, the driver suddenly slamming the brakes, basically anything that would cause the car to jolt really hard. But the truth is, this trigger event could have been anything. It was snowing very heavily, and Karen admitted she had been drinking, as had everyone else at the house that night, and maybe she could have accidentally slammed her brakes a little hard when pulling out of Brian's driveway. So while this initially looks like definitive proof that she likely whacked John with her car and left him there in the cold with a head injury, it's really not proof at all. Hitting a simple bump in the road could trigger something like this. It happens all the time. But no one believed this at the time. After all, there was damage to Karen's taillight. She was drunk, she was angry, and in the eyes of police, it only made sense that she decided right then and there she was done with John, so she hit him with her car. When you add on her other beliefs that he may have been unfaithful, well, it all just adds up. But just keep all of this in mind for later. We'll get back to that. Because by now, rescue personnel had arrived, and John tragically could not be saved. After uncovering his body, rescuers found that he had a very serious injury to his head, and his arms were also covered in very strange scratches. The whole scene just looked weird. Karen was extremely emotional too, both in the background of the call and in front of everyone who was searching for him. And there was just a lot to unpack for the police. But things would only go downhill from here. Now, there's one thing you need to understand about this case. The house at 34 Fairview Road was not just some random house. It belonged to Brian Albert, a fellow Boston police officer, and his wife Nicole. And inside the house that night were people connected by family, friendship, or even law enforcement. Nicole's sister, Jennifer McCabe, was also involved. So was Jennifer's husband, Matthew. Brian Higgins was there too, a friend of Brian Albert's and an agent with the ATF. In other words, the people surrounding this case weren't just party guests. They were people with connections, and people that knew each other, and people who in one way or another understood how investigations worked. And that matters because Karen Reed and John O'Keefe arrived at that house, and the people inside later claimed John never came in. But Karen knew that he did. This one disagreement would become the entire fracture point of the case, because if John never entered the house, then the state's theory was simple. Karen hit him with her SUV outside and left him in the snow. But if John did go inside, then the whole case changes. Suddenly the question is no longer what happened in that driveway. It becomes what happened in that house, and why everyone there seemed so certain John was never in it. There are a few other names that'll matter later, like John Albert Jr., whose birthday party was happening that night, and Carrie Roberts, one of John's friends who helped search for him that morning. And then there's Chloe, the Albert's German Shepherd. That may sound like a random detail right now, but it soon becomes one of the strangest parts of this entire case. For now, though, all you need to know is this. John O'Keefe ended up dead outside a house full of people connected to law enforcement. Those people said he never came inside. Karen Reed said something didn't add up. And from that point forward, the case was no longer just about a woman accused of hitting her boyfriend. It was about whether the official story made any sense at all. The investigation into John's mysterious passing started almost immediately, and the lead investigator in this case was a former Massachusetts state police officer, Michael Proctor. But that only made the investigation so much worse. See, Michael, right off the bat, was really snide towards Karen for some reason. And to top this off, a few hours into the case, and he was spilling all of the details of an active and serious investigation on a group chat with his friends. He wrote things like how they wouldn't be able to prove that Karen hit John with her car, and the case should be solved relatively quickly because all the powers that be want answers ASAP. Whatever that means. And as if discussing a case with his friends like it was a Sunday baseball game wasn't enough, he called Karen inappropriate names, reportedly told his friends that she was done for, and made fun of her medical condition. Needless to say, all of this was uncalled for. But as expected, 4 days after John's passing on February 2nd, 2022, his girlfriend Karen was arrested and charged with manslaughter, motor vehicle homicide, and leaving the scene of a motor vehicle collision that caused death. She appeared in court and pleaded not guilty to all of the charges. But then, in June of 2022, new charges were added, which included manslaughter while under the influence of alcohol and leaving the scene of a personal injury and death, and again, she pleaded not guilty. Her bail was set at $100,000, and she paid it and was released. She insisted she was not responsible for her boyfriend's death, nor could she have even possibly been there at the time that he ended up by that flagpole. She was just sitting there watching the front door the whole time from her car. She saw John go in, and if he'd come back out, she would have seen it. But she didn't. So she got Alan Jackson and David Yannetti as her attorneys, and they started their work. Surprisingly, around the same time as Karen's arrest, her attorneys were contacted by an anonymous man, later revealed to be a local private investigator by the name of Stephen Scanlon, who claimed that Karen was actually innocent, and it was actually Brian Albert and his nephew Colin who were responsible for John's attack and his subsequent death. The caller claimed that John was lured into the Alberts' residence, and something happened between him, Brian, and Colin, and that ultimately led to his unfortunate passing. And then Brian and an unnamed federal agent helped to drag him out of the house and onto the front lawn where he was eventually found. Now initially, this unnamed federal agent's identity was kept secret, but I'll tell you right now, his name was Brian Higgins. Stephen, the PI who was explaining all this, also came forward and claimed that he'd called David Yannetti and notified him of this tip as well. So Karen's lawyers both knew about all this. This was a big moment in the investigation because up to this point, Karen had no way to defend herself. It was her word against a bunch of cops who were at the house that evening. The fact that the couple had been fighting, with Karen being unwilling to go to the Alberts, and the overall tension leading up to this incident, it just rubbed everyone the wrong way. Everyone suspected Karen, and she had no defense until now. And supposedly it was their plan all along to pin this crime on Karen. They knew that she was drunk, and they knew that she was waiting out in the car all evening, and they knew she was angry. So it was about as clean of an explanation as there could possibly be. But Karen and her attorneys vowed to not go down without a fight. And sure enough, they'd found some truly disturbing revelations. At this point, the only thing the state had going for them was Karen's damaged taillight. The prosecution believed that the taillight got damaged during the impact with John. But Karen's attorneys didn't think so. They strongly believed that the evidence was falsified to trap her and make her look guilty. And who falsified that evidence, according to the defense? Well, none other than former trooper Michael Proctor. See, Michael actually recovered the broken taillight in one of the searches on February 11th. CCTV footage also showed Michael standing behind Karen's vehicle almost exactly at the spot where the taillight was broken, and it's alleged that he tampered with it there and then planted the evidence to divert the attention from the Alberts and the McCabe's to Karen. But we have to remember, Karen was seen on security footage from her home accidentally backing into one of John's cars. So is it really so hard to assume that this is how she broke her taillight? Now, there were pieces of her taillight found near the scene of the crime, but as we've established, Michael was also seen wandering around the area of the broken taillight, and then Michael was also seen at the scene of the crime. Interesting. Also, Michael is known to have allegedly had close ties with the Alberts, the owner of the house where John was found. But then, there was the odd phone activity that's also highly disputed from both sides. See, there was a supposed three-way butt dial that took place early on the morning of John's death. This started with Brian Albert calling Brian Higgins on his phone. The call itself was just a second long, and it was placed at about 2:22 a.m. This was less than 4 hours before John was found. And then 17 seconds later, Higgins was the one to call Albert, and the call lasted about 22 seconds. This didn't seem like a butt dial, but according to Higgins, it was exactly that. He claimed that the phone must have dialed Albert's number when he'd been fooling around with his wife in bed. But then Jennifer McCabe entered this whole fiasco too. See, during the drive to 34 Fairview, John and Jennifer talked on the phone as she was giving him directions to the Alberts' residence. This was all accounted for. What wasn't, though, was 7 inexplicable calls made by Jennifer to John between 12:29 a.m. and 12:50 a.m. Jennifer, just like Albert and Higgins, conveniently doesn't remember making these calls, but claimed that it must have been a butt dial too when she pocketed her phone. But interestingly, Jennifer had deleted those call records from her phone, and Brian Higgins destroyed his phone and got rid of it after the investigation began. How convenient. But speaking of Jennifer, she did another thing on her phone too. She made a very disturbing yet eerily fitting Google search sometime around the time of John's incident. But that specific timing is kind of unclear. But according to Karen's lawyers, they claimed that the search was made at about 2:30 a.m., the supposed time of John's attack. But what was this Google search about? Well, Jennifer searched how long it takes for someone to die in the cold. The first trial against Karen was held on April 24th of 2024. The state focused on the broken taillight and a bunch of evidence that they thought was consistent with Karen hitting John with her car, troubles in their relationship, infidelity, and supposedly flirtatious texts sent between Karen and Brian Higgins. The defense's claim rode on the cover-up theory. They claimed that Karen was being wrongfully framed for John's attack, and that it was actually the Alberts and the people in the house at the time who attacked and subsequently caused John's death. And then they planted evidence, spun stories, and used their powerful influence to pin it all on Karen. Everything from the way the investigation was handled, the mistreatment of Karen at the hands of the police, especially Michael Proctor, and John's injuries being consistent with those of a car collision, were part of the defense's argument. But eventually, on July 1st, the trial was declared a mistrial, with the jury unable to come to a unanimous decision on Karen's charges and conviction. But a second trial was held in April of the following year, and this time, the defense had more evidence in Karen's favor, and it was John's injuries. And this is where Chloe, the German Shepherd, comes into things. See, according to the defense, John's injuries were consistent with a dog bite, and to everyone's surprise, Chloe was rehomed shortly after John passed away, being sent to a farm in Vermont. All of this was just too much to be coincidental. Now, German Shepherds are known to be very protective of their owners, especially when they're in trouble or in distress. So if some sort of fight did break out in the home that evening, it's not crazy to assume that Chloe may have involved herself somehow. But if you can imagine, things are about to get even more strange, because when John's injuries were later tested for dog DNA, well, they found none. But what they did find was pig DNA. Now, this has never been explained, and no one knows how this could have possibly happened, but the defense strongly alleged that the Alberts and McCabe's tried their best to get rid of all the evidence that would point fingers at them, and even got rid of their phones and then their family dog. But thankfully, after all of this was presented in court, the trial wrapped up relatively quickly, and on June 18th of 2025, Karen Reed was found not guilty. Karen spoke about this whole ordeal in an interview after the fact, and said she had a life before all of this, a job, a routine, and everything was mundane and uneventful. And after this incident, she was just fighting for her life back, for something she had no part in, and in my opinion, very clearly so. It's scary to think that she could have ended up in prison for something she likely didn't even do, but her attorneys fought tooth and nail for her freedom. A movement was started in Karen's favor, #FreeKarenReed, and people who supported and stood by her were present outside the courthouse, and the crowd erupted into cheers and tears when the verdict was given. Now, Karen was found guilty of driving under the influence. This much was undeniable, and she was given a year's probation and had her license suspended. And as of recently, well, John's family has also filed a wrongful death suit against her, whereas she's also filed a civil lawsuit against the Massachusetts State Police for misconduct and trying to frame her for her own boyfriend's murder. Michael Proctor was fired from his job in March of 2025 following his actions and the investigation into this case. And in December of that same year, Michael's certification was permanently suspended, preventing him from ever working in law enforcement again. It remains to be seen what becomes of the court case that Karen has filed, as well as the one that John's family filed against her. But ultimately, the outcome here is the same. No one knows what really happened to John. No one has been held accountable for his murder. But I think we can all agree on one thing. Something strange happened at the Alberts' home that night. But the truth of the matter may forever remain unknown.